Imagine walking into a house that has always felt like a sanctuary, a home filled with laughter, pictures on the walls, the smell of a familiar dinner, and the hum of ordinary life. Now imagine that same home transformed in an instant into a nightmare. That was the reality for the world-famous filmmaker Rob Reiner and his wife Michelle, found brutally murdered in their Brentwood estate. The shocking truth? The person who took their lives was their own son, Nick Reiner. A name that once meant love and family now echoes in headlines with terror and disbelief. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The story of Nick Reiner is one that shakes the very foundation of trust, loyalty, and parental bonds. How does a son, raised in comfort, under the eyes of a father who built an empire of storytelling and a mother who nurtured life with grace, become a murderer? What forces, psychological, emotional, or hidden, could twist someone's mind to this point? These are not just rhetorical questions. They are the haunting inquiries that the world, law enforcement, and every parent asks in the wake of this tragedy. Filmmaker Rob Reiner, known for classics that defined generations, and Michelle, whose warmth was the anchor of their family, were found on a Sunday afternoon, lifeless on their bed. According to the Los Angeles County Medical Examiner, they suffered multiple sharp force injuries, a clinical term that fails to convey the sheer horror of the scene. They had been brutally stabbed, victims not of strangers, but of the very person they raised, the son they loved. The Los Angeles authorities confirmed the chilling details quickly. Nick, 32, who lived in the guest house on the same sprawling $13.5 million property, was arrested that night. 2 counts of first-degree murder now hang over him. But arrest records, police reports, and courtroom documents barely scratch the surface of the deeper, darker story. Behind these dry facts lie a series of events, behaviors, and videos, 9 in particular, that reveal a twisted narrative leading up to a night that no family, no parent, could have imagined. Before we dive into the videos themselves, it's important to understand the context. Rob and Michelle Reiner were not just Hollywood figures. They were people, parents, friends, neighbors, mentors, and they had spent decades creating a life filled with achievement and respect. Rob's name is synonymous with groundbreaking films, movies that captured the American experience with humor, heartbreak, and keen observation. Michelle, though less public, was a cornerstone of their family, supporting Rob while nurturing their children. In every photograph, every public appearance, they seemed the embodiment of success, stability, and love. But public appearances can be deceiving. We know this now more than ever. What lies behind closed doors often tells a completely different story. Close friends, neighbors, and even casual acquaintances began piecing together the subtle signs, the tiny cracks in a seemingly perfect facade. A few raised eyebrows, a whispered concern, a moment of tension brushed off as trivial. Sometimes, the most ordinary behaviors hide extraordinary danger. And then there are the videos. 9 haunting videos, each revealing a piece of the puzzle. At first glance, they might seem ordinary. Perhaps a teenager joking around, perhaps a son filming a private moment. But look closer, pay attention, and a disturbing pattern emerges. Gestures too tense, expressions too cold, laughter that doesn't reach the eyes. Subtle threats disguised as mundane behavior. Every frame, every second, tells a story no one wanted to acknowledge until it was too late. These videos are a roadmap, a prelude, a series of red flags that, in hindsight, seem impossible to ignore. But what was so chilling about them was not just the content. It was the context, the knowledge that they were made by someone who lived in the shadow of love, yet seemed increasingly estranged from it. That this same person, raised in privilege and security, could harbor thoughts dark enough to culminate in murder. As we go deeper into this story, consider the paradox. Hollywood teaches us that stories are simple. Heroes, villains, plot lines with clean endings. Life, however, rarely gives us such clarity. The real story of Nick Reiner, his parents, and those fateful days is far more complex, far more human, and far more terrifying. There is no comfort in knowing the script beforehand. There is only the shock of reality and the question that haunts every viewer. Could this happen to anyone? Could this happen to me? But let's pause for a moment. Think about the magnitude of what occurred. This was not a random act of violence. This was a calculated, premeditated act carried out by someone who knew every habit, every weakness, every routine of his victims. It was intimate, horrifyingly so. There is something profoundly unsettling about murder within a family. It violates the very foundation of human trust. A parent-child bond is meant to be sacred, unbreakable, and protective. And yet, on that Sunday afternoon, every expectation was shattered. The horror of this crime is only compounded by its proximity to us. The Reiners were not distant figures, distant celebrities in a news clip. They were people who had built a life that was visible, documented, and admired. Their home was a landmark of privilege, their family admired for both talent and cohesion. When tragedy strikes such a family, the ripple effect is enormous. It transcends Los Angeles. It transcends Hollywood. It reverberates into our collective psyche, forcing us to confront uncomfortable truths about family, trust, and the shadows that can exist even in the brightest lives. And yet, even in this darkness, curiosity pulls us forward. What was Nick thinking in the days, weeks, months leading up to this moment? What signals were there, hidden in plain sight, in videos, in private interactions, in fleeting expressions? The story of Nick Reiner is not just a story of murder. It is a story of unraveling, of a mind in turmoil, of family dynamics gone horribly wrong. It is a story that asks the audience to look deeper, to question assumptions, and to recognize the warning signs that often go unnoticed until tragedy strikes. We will explore each of the 9 videos in painstaking detail, uncovering behaviors, moments, and expressions that seem almost innocuous at first, yet in hindsight, reveal a terrifying trajectory. Each video is a chapter in a psychological thriller that ended in real life. From subtle facial expressions to tonal shifts in speech, from seemingly ordinary teenage antics to behaviors that hint at deep resentment, these videos collectively tell the story of a mind inching closer to a breaking point. As we move forward, I want you to remember this. While headlines will tell you the who, what, and where, the deeper story asks why. Why did Nick Reiner act the way he did? How could someone who grew up in love and comfort arrive at this point? And perhaps most importantly, what can the world learn from the signs, the patterns, and the haunting moments captured on video? These questions will guide us through every chapter, every scene, every chilling moment. So buckle up. The story ahead is not easy. It is uncomfortable, unsettling, and relentless. You will be drawn into the world of the Reiner family, the subtle tensions, the quiet warnings, and ultimately, the night that changed everything. By the time we reach the end, you will see how ordinary moments can mask extraordinary danger, how love and violence can coexist in the most terrifying ways, and how the clues to a tragedy often exist long before it occurs. But before we dive into the videos, before we piece together the puzzle that led to murder, we need to understand the family behind the headlines. Rob Reiner and Michelle were more than names on a marquee. They were people with dreams, flaws, and ordinary routines. And Nick? Well, Nick was their son, the person they believed they knew better than anyone. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What if the people you think you know the best, the ones who raised you, the ones you trust without question, harbor secrets that are invisible to the world? Imagine living under the same roof as someone whose outer life is perfect, polished, untouchable, yet whose private world is full of tension, conflict, and unspoken fears. That was the reality inside the Brentwood estate, where filmmaker Rob Reiner and his wife Michelle lived. A home that looked serene, stable, and inviting on the outside hid fractures that no one could have imagined. To understand how tragedy struck, you have to first understand the family. Rob Reiner was a public figure whose name carried weight, respect, and expectation. Known for his groundbreaking films, from comedies that shaped pop culture to dramas that made audiences cry in theaters, Rob was more than a filmmaker. He was a storyteller who seemed to have mastered life itself. Yet, behind the camera and away from the applause, the man many saw as confident and composed was also a father grappling with challenges few could see. Michelle Reiner, equally influential though far less public, was the heart of the household. Friends described her as nurturing, patient, and the kind of mother who could soothe a child's worst fears with a single word or gesture. She was the anchor that kept the family grounded while Rob navigated the high-stakes world of Hollywood. Together, they built a life that on the surface seemed enviable. A sprawling estate in Brentwood, a legacy of creative achievement, and children who were largely out of the public eye but under the watchful eyes of their parents. But the facade of perfection is just that, a facade. According to neighbors and insiders, tensions had been quietly building for years. There were arguments in whispered tones that neighbors occasionally overheard. Small conflicts over trivial matters. A door slammed. A raised voice. Moments so seemingly insignificant that most brushed them off. Yet, in hindsight, these were more than just ordinary family disagreements. They were the early tremors of a fault line no one wanted to acknowledge. Nick Reiner, the youngest child, grew up in this environment. On paper, his life was everything a parent could want for their child. Access to opportunities, exposure to creative minds, a home filled with resources and love. Yet, being surrounded by greatness can also cast long shadows. Growing up as the son of a celebrated filmmaker comes with pressures most outsiders could never understand. Expectations, comparisons, subtle criticisms that linger longer than a harsh word. How much did this contribute to the tension that ultimately exploded in violence? Friends of the family described Rob as a man who could be both loving and demanding, nurturing and exacting. Michelle was a peacemaker, often caught in the crossfire between father and son. There were accounts of Nick showing intense moods that fluctuated rapidly, moments of charm and laughter followed by silence and withdrawal. Some dismissed these as teenage rebellion or young adult struggles, but others saw patterns. Were these patterns normal adolescent behavior, or warning signs no one was willing to face? Consider the contradictions. A family celebrated in Hollywood circles for their warmth and cohesion, yet privately, there were moments of fear, confusion, and unspoken resentment. Neighbors would later recall hearing arguments late at night, the type of disputes that stopped the heart briefly, even if only for a second. Friends noticed Nick pulling away from family events, disappearing into his room for hours, his demeanor shifting from playful to brooding in an instant. It was as if two versions of him existed. One polished and socially acceptable, the other tense, volatile, and unpredictable. How well can a parent really know a child? We like to think we can read expressions, notice changes in behavior, understand moods. But what if the very person you've raised is hiding something so profound, so dark, that it escapes every observation? Rob and Michelle lived this duality every day. They laughed together at the dinner table. They hosted friends in the living room. They appeared normal. But in the shadows of their home, cracks were forming, silent, invisible, deadly. There were also moments of love that were genuine, unmistakable, and yet somehow intertwined with tension. A gentle touch on the shoulder, a word of praise, a hug. Parents who tried to connect, to soothe, to understand a son who increasingly seemed unreachable. And then, almost immediately, an argument over nothing that escalated faster than anyone could have predicted. Emotional whiplash. The kind that leaves lasting impressions, confusion, and sometimes resentment. Now, think about this from the perspective of Nick. Living in a house where love and expectation coexist in such a delicate, complicated balance can be suffocating. Imagine carrying the weight of legacy, of a father's fame, a mother's high standards, and the quiet judgment of a world that admires your family. Imagine the frustration of being constantly measured against a standard you can never meet because that standard is perfect, public, and unyielding. And yet, paradoxically, there were signs that Nick cared deeply for his parents. Friends noted moments where he showed empathy, concern, and even protectiveness. He was capable of love. He was capable of charm. But love, especially in high-pressure environments, is complicated. When resentment and isolation take root alongside affection, the results can be unpredictable and sometimes catastrophic. Some close friends and family members later reflected on interactions that now seem ominous in retrospect. A glance that lingered too long, a smile that didn't reach the eyes, words spoken in jest but carrying an edge of anger. On their own, any one of these moments might seem trivial. But when stacked together, When viewed in hindsight alongside the videos that will follow, they paint a picture that is chilling and impossible to ignore. The Reiners, like many families, had their routines, their rituals, their ways of maintaining order. Rob would often retreat to his office, papers and scripts surrounding him, a way to control part of the chaos in his life. Michelle, meanwhile, oversaw the home, ensuring the schedules of children, visitors, and household staff aligned. And Nick? He had his space in the guest house, a few steps away from the main house, yet close enough that he was never truly isolated. Proximity, it turns out, can be both comforting and dangerous. Imagine the tension that must have existed in those last days before the tragedy. A family together physically, yet emotionally disconnected. A son living mere feet from his parents, but trapped in a mental space that no one could fully reach. A father trying to guide, a mother trying to mediate, a child increasingly distant and unpredictable. It is a pressure cooker scenario, and we know from history that pressure cookers explode in ways that seem sudden, but are often the culmination of long, unseen build-ups. What did the Reiners see in Nick? Did they notice his subtle changes? Did they sense a growing distance or bitterness? Perhaps they did. Perhaps they tried to intervene. But sometimes love is not enough. Sometimes parental intuition misses the mark, overshadowed by hope, denial, or the desire to believe the best in someone we love. And when those moments pass unaddressed, they can set the stage for tragedy. So, as we prepare to examine the videos that foreshadowed the unthinkable, remember this: the Reiner family was not inherently broken. They were complex, flawed, human, and deeply intertwined. Their tragedy is a reminder that appearances can deceive, that perfection is often a mask, and that the darkest moments can hide in the most ordinary settings. And now, the videos. The 9 haunting recordings that captured pieces of Nick's mind, fragments of a psyche teetering on the edge. They start innocuously enough, playful even, but each one adds a layer of tension, a hint of unease, a breadcrumb leading to that Sunday afternoon in Brentwood. Each frame tells a story, each gesture is a clue, each expression is a whisper of the chaos brewing beneath the surface. What makes a child, a son, someone we believe we know intimately, begin a path that leads to something so unthinkable? Could the seeds of tragedy be planted early, in ways almost invisible at the time? When we look at Nick Reiner's childhood, the story is not one of immediate alarm, but of subtle signals, patterns that in hindsight hint at growing tension, emotional instability, and an unsettling preoccupation with control. Nick was born into a life most would consider enviable. He had access to privilege, opportunity, and influence that many could only dream of. His father, Rob Reiner, was already an established filmmaker, commanding respect and admiration across Hollywood. His mother, Michelle, offered stability, care, and guidance. The Brentwood estate itself, a sprawling home with sprawling gardens and goose houses, represented comfort and security. On the surface, Nick's life seemed idyllic. Yet, the pressures of legacy, expectation, and public scrutiny can weigh heavily, even in luxurious circumstances. From a young age, Nick displayed behaviors that were often dismissed as ordinary quirks. Friends and relatives would later describe him as smart, witty, and occasionally mischievous. Yet there were also moments when his mood would shift suddenly, when anger or frustration bubbled up unexpectedly. A broken toy could provoke a disproportionate reaction. A minor disagreement with a sibling or peer could result in prolonged sulking or withdrawal. These were subtle, often overlooked signals, but they were there. It's tempting to assume that such behaviors are merely typical childhood rebellion. Many parents have stories of tantrums, mood swings, and testing boundaries. But in Nick's case, several people later noted a consistency and intensity to his reactions that set him apart. There was an intensity behind his actions, a fixated quality in his focus, whether it was in completing a project, asserting a point, or reacting to perceived slights. Small frustrations could escalate rapidly, sometimes followed by an almost immediate return to charm or humor, leaving adults uncertain how to respond. Psychologists often refer to this type of behavior as oscillating emotional regulation, a child who swings between extremes, masking one emotion with another. In the case of Nick, This pattern would continue into adolescence and early adulthood, creating a paradoxical image. A bright, engaging, seemingly well-adjusted young man who also exhibited worrying signs of impulsivity, detachment, and occasionally, aggression. School life offered further clues. Teachers recalled a student who was attentive, creative, and intelligent, yet prone to moments of intense moodiness. Nick had friends, participated in activities, and performed well academically, but he could also become isolated, retreating for hours, refusing to engage, or responding with anger to criticism. To outsiders, these were manageable adolescent behaviors, but to those closer to him, they hinted at deeper currents beneath the surface. Family dynamics played a significant role in shaping Nick's emotional world. Rob and Michelle, like many parents, attempted to balance guidance with freedom, discipline with encouragement. They celebrated Nick's achievements, from grades to personal milestones, and tried to address conflicts with empathy. Yet, the expectations implicit in being the son of Rob Reiner, living up to a public standard of success, navigating a family legacy, and managing the weight of public perception, added pressure. For Nick, this invisible weight may have exacerbated tendencies toward frustration, anger, and isolation. Consider the subtle contradictions of his upbringing. He was loved deeply, yet expected to excel in ways that often went unspoken. He was given freedom, yet closely observed. He was encouraged to be creative, yet held to the unrelenting standard of a family that excelled in the public eye. Navigating these contradictions is difficult for any child. For someone with tendencies toward emotional volatility, it can be overwhelming. Nick's relationship with his parents, particularly his father, was complex. Rob Reiner, by all accounts, was a caring and attentive parent, but he also had a strong personality and high standards. He demanded focus, responsibility, and respect, qualities that can be difficult for any child to reconcile with innate impulses toward rebellion or independence. For Michelle, the dynamic was different. She was the peacemaker, the one attempting to bridge the gap between father and son, offering understanding where there was frustration and patience where there was anger. Yet, the family system as a whole was fragile, and small tensions often left lingering effects. There were also early signs of Nick seeking control over his environment. Anecdotes from childhood friends and family suggest he could become obsessed with order, insist on doing things his way, and react negatively when plans were disrupted. At times, these behaviors were mistaken for ambition or determination. In hindsight, they can be seen as early indicators of a desire for dominance or a struggle with impulse management, traits that would become more pronounced in later years. Another aspect to consider is social influence. Growing up in the shadow of a famous parent can be both an advantage and a burden. On one hand, doors are open and opportunities abound. On the other, scrutiny is relentless and comparisons are inevitable. Nick may have internalized pressures that were invisible to outsiders, creating a growing sense of tension, resentment, or inadequacy. Emotional responses that seemed minor in isolation were amplified by this context. Psychologists often discuss the cumulative impact of stressors over time. In Nick's case, each minor frustration, every perceived slight, every moment of tension or criticism contributed to a psychological accumulation, a simmering pressure cooker. The outward appearance of normalcy masked this internal buildup. Parents, friends, and teachers could only see pieces of the puzzle. Only by looking retrospectively, through the lens of the tragic outcome, do the pieces begin to align. It's important to note that not every child with mood swings or behavioral challenges becomes violent. What makes Nick's case extraordinary and terrifying is the combination of underlying tendencies, family dynamics, and a series of reinforcing stressors that ultimately intersected in ways that led to the fatal event. Understanding the trajectory requires examining not just individual actions, but patterns of behavior over years, the context in which those behaviors occurred, and the ways in which early warning signs went unnoticed or unaddressed. Nick's adolescence offers further insight. He displayed moments of intense creativity, ambition, and engagement with the world. Yet these were often paired with withdrawal, emotional volatility, and subtle aggression. For a parent, such contradictions are confusing. How do you respond to brilliance one moment and alarming behavior the next. How do you intervene without pushing a child further into secrecy or rebellion? These were questions Rob and Michelle faced repeatedly, often without clear answers. Some insiders have speculated about instances of bullying, isolation, or perceived rejection in Nick's formative years. While specifics remain private, it's clear that Nick experienced moments of frustration and conflict that, combined with personality traits and environmental pressures, contributed to a growing internal tension. Each event may have seemed minor at the time, but collectively, they created a psychological environment primed for instability. By the time Nick reached his late 20s, patterns had solidified. Behavioral quirks became habits. Frustrations escalated more quickly. Withdrawal became more frequent. At the same time, he remained capable of charm, engagement, and social interaction, creating a duality that made it even harder for outsiders, and perhaps even his parents, to fully grasp the danger. He was both familiar and unknowable, a son they loved, a young man they struggled to understand. This brings us to the first glimpses of the videos that would later become central to understanding the trajectory toward murder. Even in the earliest recordings, subtle indicators of emotional tension, obsession, and unpredictability appear. Small expressions, fleeting glances, moments of irritation, all captured on camera without the family fully realizing their significance. These early red flags are crucial. They demonstrate a pattern, behaviors that seem innocuous in isolation, but when viewed sequentially, reveal a mind increasingly detached from restraint, empathy, or caution. As we explore these videos, consider the paradox. Nick was a son, a member of a family celebrated for love and achievement. Yet he was also a young man navigating intense pressures, internal conflicts, and unresolved emotional tension. How could these forces coexist without exploding sooner? How did the behaviors escalate without intervention until they culminated in tragedy? These are the questions that will guide us as we delve into the first two haunting videos. The first clear evidence that the seeds of disaster had begun to take root. What if I told you that the first hints of tragedy were already captured on camera long before anyone could have imagined what was coming? That the videos exist not just as recordings, but as warning signs, subtle, chilling, almost imperceptible until now. The first two of these haunting videos are crucial. They give us a window into Nick Reiner's mind, moments frozen in time that, in hindsight, are almost impossible to watch without a shiver running down your spine. The very first video is deceptively ordinary. It begins with Nick sitting on the edge of a couch in the guest house, a casual smile on his face, his eyes scanning the room as if anticipating someone's arrival. At first glance, it seems like any typical home recording. A teen fooling around with a camera, experimenting with angles, maybe even joking. But watch closely. There is something subtle, something almost imperceptible in the way he tilts his head. A twitch in the corner of his mouth. A tension in his hands. It's as if the outward cheer is a mask, a carefully crafted facade. And it's this duality, normalcy layered over tension, that will haunt every video that follows. The tone of the first video oscillates quickly. He laughs at a joke that isn't heard. His body language suddenly stiffens. His gaze flickers toward a corner of the room. Why? What is he noticing that the viewer cannot? It's a micro moment, but in the context of the unfolding story, it becomes deeply unsettling. We see someone whose outward appearance is controlled, almost charming, while beneath the surface, a quiet storm is brewing. The camera captures this tension inadvertently, but for those who know what to look for, it screams. The second video is even more disturbing because the shifts in his behavior are sharper, more pronounced. This time, Nick is alone, pacing a room filled with natural light streaming from the large Brentwood windows. He speaks to the camera directly, narrating an imaginary scenario with exaggerated confidence. But something feels off. There is an undercurrent of impatience, an edge in his tone, as if he is arguing with someone invisible, someone who has wronged him. The smile that appears on his face is fleeting, quickly replaced by a furrowed brow, tension in the jaw, fingers clenching and unclenching. It is in these tiny details that the horror begins to take shape. Most people would dismiss the gestures, the expressions, the small shifts in tone. Perhaps they would assume teenage theatrics, the kind of moodiness that passes unnoticed. But when combined with what we already know about Nick's upbringing, his family dynamics, and later behaviors, these early videos become something far more sinister. They are premonitions, breadcrumbs that, in hindsight, map a trajectory toward violence. What's particularly chilling is how calculated Nick appears, even in casual settings. In the second video, he repeats certain phrases, almost rehearsing them, as if testing their impact. A simple shrug, a glance toward the door, a pause before speaking. These small acts suggest someone aware of being observed, someone practicing control, manipulation, or performance. Could this have been rehearsal for later, darker acts? Or was it simply a reflection of a mind learning to mask inner turmoil? The line between normal adolescent behavior and disturbing psychological patterns becomes blurred. Viewers often report a creeping sense of unease while watching these first two videos. It's not overtly violent. There are no sharp objects, no threats, no screams. Yet the tension is palpable. Each frame contains contradictions, a smile that doesn't reach the eyes, laughter tinged with frustration, casual movements that betray underlying anxiety. This is the subtlety of psychological warning signs. They exist, almost imperceptibly, in the minutiae of behavior. Psychologists analyzing these videos have pointed out several key indicators. First, the emotional oscillation. The rapid switch between charm, humor, and tension is often a sign of internal conflict and difficulty regulating emotions. Second, the rehearsal behavior. The repeated phrases, the gestures toward invisible observers, suggests a desire for control, possibly an awareness of power dynamics and the impact of one's actions. Finally, the micro-expressions, tiny flickers of anger, resentment, or detachment, indicate that beneath the surface, a more volatile emotional state is simmering. Individually, these details may seem insignificant. Together, they paint a portrait that is profoundly unsettling. But let's step back for a moment. Consider how these videos would have appeared to someone who didn't know the full story. A casual observer might have laughed at the antics, dismissed the oddities, assumed teenage mood swings. And that is precisely what makes them terrifying. The danger was hidden in plain sight, cloaked by normalcy, almost invisible until tragedy struck. How often do we miss these signals in real life, only recognizing their significance too late? By the end of the second video, the sense of tension has already escalated. Nick sits in silence, camera capturing every subtle twitch, every slight shift of posture. He is alone, yet there is a sense of anticipation, a quiet expectation that something is about to happen. It's a calm before the storm, a snapshot of a mind teetering on the edge, trying to negotiate internal chaos with outward composure. For viewers, this is deeply disquieting. You watch, aware of what is coming, but powerless to intervene. What makes these first two videos even more haunting is their connection to family dynamics. While watching, it's impossible not to consider Rob and Michelle's presence or absence in Nick's life at the time. Were these behaviors noticed, acknowledged, or misunderstood by his parents? Did they see the tension, the rehearsal, the flickers of aggression and frustration? Or did they interpret them as typical adolescent behavior, small idiosyncrasies in an otherwise bright child? These questions linger, unanswered, adding another layer of psychological horror to what is already an unsettling viewing experience. And then there is the emotional weight. Watching Nick, knowing what would happen later, is excruciating. Each gesture, each glance, each subtle change in expression becomes a piece of a puzzle we are desperate to solve. The videos are more than recordings. They are psychological footprints. They show us a young man struggling with inner turmoil, masking it with charm and humor, rehearsing for interactions that may never have needed rehearsal. And yet, for those who look closely, these are the first indications of a mind preparing for an act that would shock the world. What is particularly important in analyzing these videos is the pattern they establish. The first video hints at tension beneath a superficial calm. The second video amplifies this tension, revealing rehearsal, obsession, and subtle aggression. Together, they create a narrative trajectory, a roadmap of escalating emotional instability. When you watch them sequentially, it becomes clear that Nick's behavior is not random. It is deliberate, patterned, and increasingly concerning. And yet, the horror is not fully visible yet. These are only the beginning. The subsequent videos, 3 through 9, show an acceleration of the behaviors, the deepening of tension, the overt expression of frustration, and eventually, the chilling preparation that precedes the murders. Each video builds upon the last, layering psychological complexity and emotional volatility until what seemed subtle becomes unmistakable. So, what can we learn from these first two videos? They are warnings, indicators, a peek into a mind already disturbed, yet still capable of outward normalcy. They remind us of the complexity of human behavior, the difficulty of detecting danger in those we trust, and the terrifying speed at which internal tension can escalate to violence. These are the breadcrumbs, the early signs, the first cracks in a facade that would soon shatter completely. And what comes next, the third and fourth videos, reveals behaviors so disturbing, so overtly unsettling, that they leave little room for doubt about the trajectory Nick was on. These videos show not just tension or rehearsal, but signs of obsession, aggression, and premeditation. They are the pivot point where unease turns into alarm, where casual observation becomes urgent concern. The story of Nick Reiner, of the Reiner family, and of the tragedy that unfolded is embedded in these recordings. They are the evidence of what was silently building, a visual diary of psychological unraveling. And as we move forward, each frame, each gesture, each fleeting expression will become increasingly critical. The warning signs are no longer subtle, they are undeniable. What happens in video 3 and 4 will take everything we've observed so far and magnify it exponentially. You might think you are prepared to see the truth, but nothing can truly prepare you for the intensity of what comes next. By now, you might be asking yourself, how could someone who seemed so ordinary, so relatable, slide into something unimaginable? The third and fourth videos of Nick Reiner are where the subtle tension of the first two recordings begins to transform into something far darker. The signs of a disturbed mind are no longer hidden. They are emerging, unmistakable, and deeply disturbing. The third video opens in the same guest house where the first two were filmed. At first, the setting seems familiar, even innocuous. Nick is seated at a desk, a laptop open in front of him, casually scrolling. But watch carefully. His fingers twitch constantly over the keyboard, tapping rhythmically, almost obsessively. He mutters to himself under his breath. A stream of words that seem directed at someone, though the camera shows he is alone. There's a tension in his posture, a rigidity in his shoulders, as if he's coiled, ready to spring at any provocation. What stands out immediately is the intensity of his gaze. In earlier videos, there was charm, a playful masking of tension. Here, the eyes tell a different story. They are sharp, scanning, calculating. At times, they dart toward a corner, toward the camera, as if seeking confirmation, validation, or maybe even permission. This is not normal teenage play. This is a mind rehearsing scenarios, imagining reactions, practicing control. And as unnerving as it is to watch, it provides a window into escalating obsession. The dialogue, though seemingly mundane, carries undertones of anger and frustration. Nick repeats phrases, emphasizing certain words with unexpected force. There's a rhythm to it, almost like he's testing their impact on an unseen audience. Small gestures, finger snapping, quick head shakes, tightening of fists, reveal impatience, irritation, and a brewing hostility that contrasts sharply with the casual tone of his words. This is no longer rehearsal for fun or creativity. This is the rehearsal of someone accustomed to tension, someone internalizing anger and plotting responses in advance. Psychologists reviewing this footage later highlighted what they call microaggression escalation. Essentially, Nick's body language and tone suggest an increasing internal conflict, a mind rehearsing potential outcomes, balancing charm and threat, empathy and aggression. To anyone watching now, knowing what happened later, these small movements are terrifying because they foreshadow action. They are a visual blueprint of someone moving toward a point of no return. The fourth video takes this escalation even further. Unlike the third, Nick is now standing, pacing the floor with purposeful steps, speaking louder, gesturing emphatically. The playful tones are gone. Laughter is scarce, replaced by muttering, sharp bursts of words, and long pauses that feel heavy with anticipation. The camera, still stationary, captures a series of movements that suggest planning, rehearsal, and obsession. At one point, he picks up an object, a pen, and holds it in a way that almost mimics a weapon. It's small, subtle, but in retrospect, deeply chilling. Here, the emotional spikes are impossible to ignore. Nick's face flickers between anger, frustration, and forced calm in rapid succession. His hands tremble slightly as he moves, his eyes narrow, and the voice rises with intensity. It is a performance of inner chaos. Even if we weren't aware of what was coming, anyone watching would sense something is wrong. The body, the speech, the tension, they all signal an unstable mental state. These videos also reveal Nick's obsession with control and dominance. Every gesture, every phrase, every glance seems intentional. He is not simply reacting to the environment. He is attempting to command it, to shape it, to dominate it. And this desire for control, combined with his growing detachment from emotional norms, is one of the key psychological elements that will eventually lead to violence. Another disturbing element is the way Nick handles silence. Long pauses punctuate the dialogue. He stares into space, eyes distant, fingers drumming lightly. These pauses are not moments of thought. They are rehearsals, mental loops, a buildup of tension that simmers just beneath the surface. It is almost as if he is talking to himself, negotiating plans, weighing outcomes, imagining scenarios that will eventually play out in the real world. What makes these two videos particularly chilling is the way Nick blends normalcy with obsession. He engages in ordinary behaviors, tidying, talking to the camera, adjusting objects, but each act is layered with underlying tension, control, and premeditation. It's the contrast that unsettles viewers. On the surface, he is simply a young man in his home. Beneath, he is rehearsing scenarios, practicing behaviors, and experimenting with control in ways that foreshadow later violence. The emotional spikes are also more pronounced. Nick exhibits rapid shifts between calm, frustration, and subtle aggression. Small irritations, a misplaced object, a thought interrupted, trigger noticeable tension. Fingers clench, shoulders stiffen, eyes narrow. These micro-moments, though brief, reveal an inner world in turmoil. They indicate that Nick's emotional regulation is deteriorating, and the premeditative behaviors suggest he is compensating by controlling his environment and rehearsing actions mentally. Viewers might notice something else in these videos, a growing obsession with secrecy and observation. Nick frequently glances toward the camera, not in casual acknowledgement, but in a way that suggests awareness of being recorded and careful calculation of behavior. There is a performative element, but it is darkly calculated. He is simultaneously practicing actions, observing himself, and maintaining a controlled image, a perfect storm of psychological preparation. The combination of rehearsal, emotional volatility, and obsessive control points to a trajectory that is deeply concerning. While early videos hinted at tension, the fifth and sixth recordings show tangible premeditation. The behaviors escalate from subtle cues to deliberate actions. Acts that suggest a mind actively preparing for a major event, though at this stage it remains hypothetical. Importantly, these videos also show the psychological duality that defines Nick's trajectory. He is capable of charm, humor, and social engagement, yet simultaneously displays obsessive behaviors, fixation on control, and moments of latent aggression. This duality is critical in understanding why warning signs were missed. To outsiders, he may appear normal, even affable. But the underlying tension, rehearsal, and premeditation tell a different story, one of a mind gradually unraveling, steadily moving toward violence. Family members, friends, and acquaintances later reflected on these recordings with shock. They noticed subtleties they had missed before: the finger twitches, the pacing, the fixation on objects, the repeated phrases. Each micro-behavior now seemed meaningful. Each gesture, previously dismissed as ordinary, was a warning sign. And as these signs became more pronounced, the videos collectively painted a picture of someone on a dangerous trajectory, someone whose internal world was increasingly out of alignment with social and familial norms. By the end of the sixth video, the escalation is unmistakable. Nick is no longer merely rehearsing, oscillating emotionally, or experimenting with control. He is practicing behaviors that, when combined with future actions, will become lethal. The micro-expressions, the rehearsal, the obsessive inspection of objects, all point to planning. It is the bridge between internal turmoil and outward violence, and it foreshadows the horrors that will follow. And yet, even at this stage, there is a haunting tension. The videos capture moments that are ordinary enough to be misinterpreted, but layered with behaviors that, in retrospect, are deeply alarming. It is the duality, the mixture of normality and obsession, that makes them so unsettling. That explains why tragedy was able to unfold despite proximity to family, despite the presence of love and guidance. What comes next, the 7th and 8th videos, removes much of the subtlety. They show behaviors that are overt, aggressive, and frightening. The rehearsal becomes direct, the fixation on potential harm more apparent, and the trajectory toward violence impossible to ignore. The calm before the storm is over, and the storm is gathering speed. By the 7th video, the progression from tension to overt aggression becomes unmistakable. What began as subtle signs, tiny twitches, rehearsed phrases, obsessive control, now escalates into behaviors that are undeniably threatening. The early rehearsals have evolved into direct expressions of anger, fixation, and intent. Watching these recordings is like witnessing the quiet before a storm, but the clouds have already darkened, and lightning is imminent. The 7th video begins with Nick moving through the main living area of the guest house, his movements purposeful, deliberate, almost predatory. He carries a small object, a household item that on its own seems innocuous, but the way he handles it is calculated. Fingers grip it tightly, his gaze flicks toward corners of the room, and his breathing becomes audible, almost rhythmic. There's a tense energy radiating from him that is impossible to ignore. Each step, each gesture, signals a mind focused on control, testing boundaries, and mentally preparing for confrontation. What is particularly chilling about this video is Nick's direct engagement with the camera. He speaks aloud, addressing someone who isn't present in the room, but with a level of intensity that suggests the words are rehearsed threats. Even without explicit mention of harm, the tone carries menace. He is practicing intimidation, testing the weight of his words, and observing their psychological impact. For viewers, this is a turning point, the first clear evidence that his behavior has shifted from internal rehearsal to outward aggression. Psychologists reviewing the footage noted several critical indicators. First, there is a clear pattern of fixation. Nick repeatedly references actions, reactions, and outcomes as though mapping a scenario in real life. Second, his body language demonstrates dominance and readiness. Hands clenched, shoulders squared, eyes scanning. These are hallmarks of someone preparing for confrontation. Third, his emotional oscillation has become more intense. Rapid shifts from calm to anger, from gesturing to stillness, indicate a mind operating under stress and obsession simultaneously. The 8th video amplifies this intensity. Nick is now standing in front of a mirror, speaking to his reflection in a tone that is both rehearsed and confrontational. The words themselves are difficult to parse completely, but the delivery is sharp, edged with anger, frustration, and calculation. He gestures with precision, his movements sharp and controlled. He experiments with posture, voice, and facial expressions, testing how he appears and how he might impact someone else. This is no longer internal rehearsal. It is preparation for an act that requires external control. What makes these videos particularly harrowing is the combination of rehearsal, obsession, and early manifestation of aggression. Nick manipulates objects, practices gestures, and rehearses phrases as if he is preparing for a confrontation he anticipates will happen. He is testing the boundaries of his own behavior and the potential responses of others. Even to someone unfamiliar with later events, the intensity is palpable. There is a sense of danger in every movement, in every glance, in every word muttered under his breath. The emotional spikes are now extreme. Nick's face alternates between calm composure and sudden flashes of irritation. Eyes narrow, lips tighten, and shoulders stiffen. He demonstrates a preoccupation with dominance and control that overshadows any playful or lighthearted moments seen in earlier videos. This is a critical evolution. The behaviors are no longer ambiguous. They are aggressive, purposeful, and potentially dangerous. Another alarming element is Nick's manipulation of his own image. He repeatedly checks posture, gestures, and expressions, as if ensuring he presents a controlled persona while mentally rehearsing aggression. It's a combination of self-surveillance and rehearsal, a psychological layering that is both sophisticated and disturbing. This is a person practicing not just action, but the emotional and visual impact of action on a target. An early indicator of premeditation. Family and friends who later viewed these videos were shocked at the overt aggression. What had once been subtle became explicit, a readiness to act, a mental obsession with control, and a rehearsal of confrontation. Each gesture, each phrase, each flash of emotion confirmed that Nick's inner turmoil had escalated into outwardly dangerous behavior. The psychological warning signs were no longer subtle, they were screaming. The 8th video also contains moments of eerie calm, a controlled demeanor layered over aggression. This duality, the ability to mask intensity with composure, made it difficult for anyone around him to fully grasp the danger. Nick was both presentable and volatile, relatable and threatening. It is this combination that allowed the trajectory toward violence to go unnoticed, or at least underestimated, until it was tragically too late. By the end of these 2 videos, the progression is clear. Nick's behavior has evolved from subtle rehearsal and tension in the early recordings to overt displays of aggression and premeditation. The micro-signals that were overlooked in the first 4 videos are now magnified, undeniable. The combination of obsessive control, rehearsal, and emotional volatility points toward an increasing likelihood of violent action. And yet, even here, the videos are not the final act. They set the stage, but the full horror is captured in videos 9 and the subsequent events that led to the murders of Rob and Michelle Reiner. These last recordings show the mind fully on the edge, the rehearsals completed, the obsession turned into intent. They reveal a culmination that no one, not even family, could have anticipated in real time. The 7th and 8th videos are pivotal. They mark the point at which concern transforms into alarm. They show that Nick's internal conflict and rehearsal behaviors have escalated into direct, observable aggression. The trajectory toward violence is no longer hypothetical. It is now real, present, and terrifyingly imminent. What comes next, the 9th video, leaves no ambiguity. It captures behaviors that are premeditative, obsessive, and chillingly calculated. The final warnings, the last breadcrumbs before the tragedy, will make it clear that the events of that Sunday were the horrifying endpoint of a long, escalating sequence. If you think the 7th and 8th videos were chilling, video 9 pushes the tension to a level that is almost unbearable. This is the final recording before the unthinkable happened, the last window into Nick Reiner's mind before tragedy struck. Unlike the previous videos, where aggression and rehearsal were building, this one leaves little room for interpretation. Every glance, every gesture, every movement signals that something catastrophic is imminent. The video opens in the guesthouse kitchen. Nick is moving methodically, pacing between the countertops, occasionally stopping to pick up utensils and household items. At first, it seems mundane, ordinary even, but there's a coldness in his movements that is impossible to ignore. Fingers tighten around objects, knuckles white. Every step is deliberate. Every pause seems rehearsed. The air feels tense, as if the camera itself is capturing an invisible pressure that is building, ready to explode. Then, there is the gaze. Nick's eyes, once playful in the early videos, now carry a piercing intensity. He stares directly into the camera, almost breaking the fourth wall, as if communicating silently with someone unseen. The expression is unnerving. A combination of calm, calculation, and barely contained rage. This is the look of a mind teetering on the edge, aware of the impending act, yet detached enough to observe itself in preparation. His dialogue is fragmented, almost whispered at first. Words repeat, phrases circle back on themselves. He appears to be talking to himself, planning out scenarios, mentally rehearsing reactions. Unlike earlier videos where he might have been experimenting, here it is purposeful. Each phrase, each gesture, is part of a mental mapping, a psychological preparation for the act he is about to commit. Objects play a central role in this video. Nick picks up a knife from the kitchen drawer, a simple, ordinary kitchen knife, but his manner of handling it is controlled and deliberate. He turns it over in his hands, observing its weight, its balance, the way it catches the light. It is not playful, not casual. This is practice, mental rehearsal, and premeditation, all rolled into one. Even for those who do not understand psychological patterns, the implication is horrifyingly clear. The tension in the video is heightened by moments of calm that are almost more terrifying than the aggression. Nick moves silently across the room, pauses, checks corners, and straightens objects obsessively. It is as if he is preparing the environment, controlling the space to fit his mental script. This controlled calm, juxtaposed with flickers of irritation and anger, creates a sense of inevitability, a feeling that the act he has been preparing for is only moments away. Psychologists who later analyzed this footage noted the clear signs of premeditation. Repeated rehearsals, object fixation, mental mapping, and obsessive control of the environment are all classic indicators. Add to this the emotional volatility, the rapid swings from calm to tension, the clenched fists, the narrowed eyes. And the warning signs are unmistakable. Video 9 captures a mind fully immersed in planning, fully engaged in preparing for the act that would soon unfold. What makes this video particularly harrowing is the interplay between detachment and obsession. Nick's movements are mechanical, almost ritualistic, yet his eyes betray intense focus. He is performing a mental script, running through scenarios, and testing his own reactions. There is no laughter, no casual charm. Just a cold, meticulous rehearsal for an act that would forever change lives. There are moments in this video that are almost unbearable to watch. A flick of the wrist, a tightening grip, a glance toward the doorway. Each movement carries an implicit threat. The small, seemingly mundane actions become loaded with meaning. The calm before the storm is over. Now, every gesture signals the imminent crossing of a line. Emotionally, the video is a roller coaster. The viewer experiences tension, dread, and disbelief all at once. How could someone so close, so familiar, be preparing for such a horrific act? How could these warning signs go unnoticed? These are questions that haunt every frame of the recording. And for those who watch knowing the outcome, every micro-expression, every movement, becomes a foreshadowing of the tragedy to come. By the end of video 9, the escalation is undeniable. Nick's obsession, aggression, and premeditation have reached a peak. The subtle rehearsals of the first videos, the growing aggression of the middle recordings, and the overt threat of videos 7 and 8 converge here. What we are witnessing is not just emotional instability. It is the crystallization of intent. The final moments of this recording are the most chilling. Nick moves toward the guest house doorway, knife in hand, gaze fixed, expression unreadable but intense. There is a sense of anticipation, a tension that is almost palpable. He pauses, looks toward the camera one last time, and then the frame cuts. No words are spoken. No action occurs within the recording itself. Yet the implication is horrifying. The storm that had been building for years, meticulously documented in these videos, is about to hit. And this is where the true tragedy begins. The sequence of events following this video, the murders of Rob and Michelle Reiner, are the devastating culmination of a series of warning signs captured in these recordings. Each video, from 1 through 9, reveals a trajectory, subtle tension evolving into aggression, rehearsal into premeditation, and obsession into lethal intent. The warning signs were there, and yet, the outcome was tragically unavoidable. The psychological and emotional weight of video 9 cannot be overstated. It is the final breadcrumb before catastrophe, the last visual evidence of a mind fully committed to an unthinkable act. The calm, the control, the meticulous preparation, it all foreshadows the violence that would occur just hours later. And for viewers, the impact is immediate and profound. A chilling reminder of how quickly inner turmoil, when left unchecked, can escalate into devastating action. What comes next is the tragic event itself. The culmination of years of tension, obsession, and premeditation reaches its devastating conclusion. The warnings, the rehearsal, the subtle and overt signals all intersect in a moment that would shock the world. The night that would end Rob and Michelle Reiner's lives began like any other in Brentwood, or at least, that is how it appeared from the outside. But inside the Reiner estate, the calm was deceptive. The warning signs had been there for weeks, captured in those haunting videos, yet no one could have predicted just how quickly tension would erupt into tragedy. As evening approached, Nick Reiner's behavior had become increasingly erratic. Those closest to him later described him as withdrawn, yet intensely focused, pacing through the guest house and occasionally peering toward the main house, as if rehearsing his next steps. He had already spent hours earlier in the day in isolation, manipulating objects, practicing gestures, and running scenarios through his mind, like a general planning a battle no one else could see. Around sundown, Rob and Michelle went about their normal routines. Dinner preparations, casual conversation, and plans for the coming week filled the house. From the outside, it appeared calm, almost serene. But those familiar with Nick's videos recognized patterns of behavior that foreshadowed danger. His obsession with control, meticulous rehearsal, and sudden mood swings all pointed toward a tipping point. And unfortunately, that tipping point was coming faster than anyone could have imagined. Nick's interactions, or lack thereof, earlier in the day were crucial indicators. Family members recalled small, unsettling moments, a tense glance, a curt response, a tightened jaw. Each seemed minor in isolation, but in the context of his psychological trajectory, they were threads weaving toward disaster. Experts later noted that these microsignals are classic precursors to impulsive violence, particularly in individuals